Number 1. Alan. The strangest kid I ever knew in my entire life was a guy named Alan. I actually say that as a compliment, however. Being a bit of a strange kid, and now, a bit of a strange adult, it only makes sense that I would be interested in other strange people. But knowing Alan was not only strange, but became dangerous at one point as well. I moved around a whole lot when I was a kid. It wasn't that we were in a military family or anything like that. My dad was just an alcoholic who was able to get a doctor to lie for him in order to get disability. We would be in a house for a while until he really began screwing up again and not paying rent. And when that happened, we had to start looking for a new place again. It was a process that I went through over and over again while I was growing up. I would be going to new neighborhoods and new school systems. A lot of times when I would go to a new school, there would be some initial excitement among the kids to have a new student, but that didn't last very long. I didn't make friends very easily or very well, and I got sort of depressed from the idea of constantly having to lose friends, so I stopped making them, after a while for the most part. So, not long after arriving at the new schools, I would just become another one of the many social outcasts. I often think that this is why I started getting interested in more academic things. I don't think I came across as a nerd, but reading books was a pretty enjoyable thing for me. This move happened around the time that I turned 14 years old. I went through the normal process of moving to a school, although this one was a school that I'm not completely sure I remember a whole lot about. My family moved into a rather big house that I was never quite sure how we could afford. Perhaps since it was in the middle of nowhere, that was the answer. Although a lot of those houses out there could be pretty pricey too. It didn't take a long time for the kids in the school to get bored with me, and it took even less time for me to get bored with them. I wasn't bullied or anything like that. I just became one of the quiet, loner kids who got left alone. So of course, that is how I came across Alan. He just happened to be another kid like that. Alan and I had a lot of the same interests, with some distinct differences. Whereas I liked to do good in school, he really didn't care about things like that. He had the knowledge and put forth the effort to learn things on his own, but didn't really try to do well or anything in school. I, on the other hand, loved doing well in school. He was that guy who did really good on tests, but never turned in a single homework assignment. But yeah, one of the things we both didn't learn in school, but were really interested in, was astronomy. And that was probably our major interest that we shared. And don't worry, that is really important to the story. We both lived in very rural areas, but surprisingly far apart from each other. In that area, that made it pretty good to like astronomy, but he always claimed that the view from his house was likely even better than the view from mine. I really didn't know how he figured such a thing, however, because he had never been to my house before. We were pretty excited about a meteor storm that was coming around on a fall day. Like before, he insisted that it would be better if we watched it from his place. So finally, I decided I would go ahead and take a trip over to his house to find out. I had to go with him by bus after school on a Friday afternoon. The shower was mainly going to be on a Saturday night, although we were likely to see something happening on Friday night too. Alan wasn't lying about him living further out in the country than I did. I had a few people who lived close to me in the area that I lived. However, his house was on a hill, and there were no other houses anywhere near his. There weren't many trees in the yard that would be able to obstruct a view either. All in all, it was a pretty amazing house, and I was pretty surprised. Everything went fine the first night that we were there. There was nothing different that I noticed about Alan. We had a nice time, and we even saw some meteors that night, but there were not many. So Alan suggested that during the main phase of the shower, that we climb up on top of the roof and watch from there. It was an odd suggestion to me, and I was slightly afraid of heights, but I thought it would be pretty cool to see the showers that way. The following night, we got situated on the roof with some snacks and things. Alan's parents were going out for the night. We had a telescope set up on the roof in case we needed to use it, but weren't really planning on it. We just got up on the roof and watched the shower. I almost forgot about my fear of heights when I was up there. Even so, at one point, Alan told me he wanted to show me Saturn on the telescope. Apparently, I would be able to see the rings that night, something I had never experienced. He stood up and told me to walk with him over to the telescope. I got up to do that. Alan had a 2-story house with a slanted roof, so I was a little wobbly when I stood up. But I knew what happened next had nothing to do with just my balance. I felt Alan's hands shove me hard before I could regain my balance. I fell, rolled off the roof of the house, and fell to the ground hard. I had broken several bones, as I found out later, so I was unable to get up. Alan didn't help me. He let me call out for help over and over again, but he never answered me. I kept expecting it to be a mistake and he would come running out of the house to help me, but he never did. I likely laid on the ground for a couple of hours before Alan's parents finally came home. They found me and did what they could to get me to the hospital. Separately, they found Alan still laying on the roof, watching the meteor shower as I lay on the ground in agony. I found out afterward that Alan had a pretty dark history, and that most of the kids, and even a lot of the teachers, wanted next to nothing to do with him. There were a few weird stories associated with him and certain things he might have done to other kids, but as it turns out, there were plenty of things that he had done that were pretty much confirmed as well. He had gotten into some really weird fights growing up, including going completely mental on boys who were nearly twice his size. He had a very violent background, and thus, that is the irony of the entire story. If I had been a little less antisocial when I first started at that school, I might have been warned about what was going on. Someone might have told me what Alan was like, before I had to find out on my own what Alan was actually like. Number 2. Letters. I went through a period of time where I was really scared of what was happening in my life. It started pretty normally, even to the point of which I didn't even realize that something was going on. It wasn't until I was able to look back and go over many specific details that I was able to see what was going on the entire time. If I look back in time, I think the first time I noticed this lady was when I was at the grocery store. I was a bit of a recluse, spending all my time in my home, which was a big country house, about an hour away from town. Being at the grocery store was the only time I really had a chance to pay attention to people. She was about 20 years younger than me, and she was sort of dark. And what I mean is that she wore dark clothes, had dark hair that looked like it had been dyed black, and she had quite a few facial piercings. I think that's the only reason why I remembered her right off the bat, was because she seemed a bit different to me. And at the time I recall thinking that she kept looking at me, and when I looked back at her, she would look down or look away. However, I almost thought at the time that I was just noticing her over and over again due to her appearance. But it was also a big grocery store, and she kept showing up in the aisles right after I had set foot in them for the first time. So it was weird to me, I guess, but not something that I would have seriously worried about. It was after that time that I began seeing this lady around more often whenever I came into town. Again, I didn't think too much about that, though. I mean, after you clearly notice someone or something more than once, you generally do see them around more often than that. She seemed to be at the grocery store every time I came to go shopping. There were a couple times that I had caught her walking behind me when I turned a corner, and just happened to look back. In those cases, she would normally not turn and follow me, though. Then I got this strange letter in the mail. It was addressed to me by name, and it was written in all uppercase letters in pencil. In the letter, I was told that I was a horrible person because I had changed my name. It said that I should admit who I am, and stop hiding the truth, or the letter writer would be forced to reveal it for me, and by that time, I would regret it. Again, I honestly didn't think too much about it, other than it just being weird. I guess when you're the recipient of something so odd, you probably just want to feel better by pretending that it doesn't exist any longer. At the time, I definitely did not make the connection between seeing that lady sometimes showing up wherever I showed up and receiving that letter. There wasn't anything really tying the two together at that point. After a while, I got another letter. The second letter seemed to be in a pretty severe tone, also making vague threats at me by alleging that I was hiding things that would be brought out into the open if I didn't reveal them myself. After getting a few more of these letters in the mail, I finally decided that they were pretty serious. So I went to the police and I filed a report about them. Unfortunately, that was really the only thing that could be done, since there was no way of telling who had sent the letters to me. After getting threatening letters in the mail for some time, I very obviously began to get paranoid. All of them made similar threats about what would happen to me if I continued to ignore the letters. The police, of course, had not done anything at all to help me feel better, so I kept expecting something worse to eventually happen. I would be nervous walking around outside or in the store, worried that the letter writer would eventually show up and do something. The paranoia was generally getting pretty bad. I normally felt pretty safe when I was at home, because other than getting the letters, nothing had really happened at home before. That was the only saving grace of the entire thing, that I completely felt safe when I was at home. I sat down one night and decided to try and read a book that I was trying to get through. I had a small study on the second floor that I liked to use to read in, so I went up there with a cup of tea and just tried to focus on my book. Something was off. I couldn't quite explain what it was, but it was just a strange feeling. If you've ever had one of those moments when you just couldn't get comfortable, or getting in any way feeling just normal, you would know how I was feeling. I got up a few times, tried to fix myself something else to drink, but I just couldn't get myself feeling good. Everything just felt wrong, and I couldn't figure out why. Around the time, though, for some reason I can't figure out, I turned to my left and looked out the window. It was so hard to see outside because it was dark. Living in that area, there were no streetlights or anything like that. But it looked like there was something outside in the tree outside the window. It looked like something was moving around, but after I squinted my eyes and tried to see everything more clearly, I jumped when I saw the strangest thing. There was someone outside my window looking in on me. When I caught sight of them, they froze like a deer in headlights. I recognized them. It was the woman that I had seen in the grocery store. She was in a tree that gave her a view right into my window. I freaked and grabbed my phone to call the police. However, when I looked out the window, she was gone. I ran downstairs and made sure that all my doors were locked, and I was fortunate that they were. I turned on the outside lights and looked around for the woman, but she was gone. When the police arrived, they didn't find anything. Not a surprise, because I lived so far out in the country, it took them a long time to arrive. All I could do was file a report and give them a description of this woman that I really didn't know anything about. And I didn't know why she was in the tree, but I suddenly began thinking that maybe it was her that was writing those letters. I mean, how long had she been spying on me? There could have been many times that she was watching me in my house, and I didn't know about it. When I was outside, in town, I was always worried about running into her. When I was at home, I was always worried she was watching me. I thought that she might not show herself again since I had caught her, but the thing about that is, you can never know for sure. When nothing happened for a while, but the nothing was maybe even scarier than if something were to happen. It was a time of sheer fear and paranoia. Finally, though, something happened. I didn't receive another letter, but I did see a little package sitting on the porch. It was addressed to me, but I hadn't been expecting a package. I didn't immediately make a connection with the letters or with seeing the girl, but when I opened the package up, I knew it had something to do with all of it. There was no letter in the package or a card, but what was in the box was the only message I needed to be scared out of my wits. There was a dead bird in the box, and it was a crow, which scared me even more because I love crows, and I have tons of pictures of crows hanging up in my house. The choice of dead bird was not random. What could I do? Only file another police report. I didn't have any information that would help me find this woman. I had no way to do anything at all to figure out what was going on and feel safe. So how does the story end? Well, it's probably disappointing. I didn't get any letters after the dead crow. I never caught the woman in my tree again. I never saw her walking around the streets or in the grocery store. But I also never got over being scared. And even to this day, I don't know if some psycho is watching me. Number 3, Windy Drive. The weather looked like it was going to be very bad that day, and probably worse that evening. I worked a roughly second shift job at the time, still do as a matter of fact, and had a really long commute home that I really wasn't looking forward to. I didn't mind the drive for the most part, except when the weather was going to be bad, and this looked like it was going to be a pretty nasty storm of some sort. For most of the day, it was strong wind with thunder and lightning, but it seemed like it was built up for hours and hours, though. When it was time for me to get off my shift, it was still in this weird storm-holding pattern that didn't seem like it was ever going to break. I had a little pickup truck, and I clocked out at 11 p.m. in order to start the 1-hour drive home. I did have a feeling that it was going to take longer than normal. My ride home was mostly through back roads, including some that were in the mountains. In this area, the best jobs normally took a lot of travel time to get to, so you dealt with the long rides in order to get the jobs, and this was going to be a very long drive, given what was going on outside. I don't know how strong the wind was, but it was really shaking the hell out of my truck. I had to drive much more carefully than usual, which meant that the ride was just going to be that much longer. The roads were normally pretty empty, but they seemed even more so that night. I don't recall seeing a single car or truck for the majority of the ride. I have made this drive more times than I could possibly tell you, so I cannot explain why it is that I made a mistake, such as the one that I made. It may have been because my truck was so small, and I was paying so much attention to trying to not get it blown off the road, but I did end up turning off of the wrong turn. It was very similar to the turn that I usually took, just because all the turns at the time were like that. But yeah, my focus was off, and about halfway through the drive home, I turned off at the wrong time. I was sort of in automatic driving mode, so I just kept following the road without realizing that I was on the wrong road. I really didn't get lost, but it was a while before I figured out that I had taken a wrong turn. Those rural routes really did seem very much alike, and when I did realize it, I didn't think that it was really that big of a deal. All I would have to do is turn around and head back home. The worst thing that was going to happen was that it would take me a lot longer to get home. From what it seemed like, to backtrack and to get back to the main road, there would be a total of about 40 minutes added onto the trip. I didn't have to get back to work the next day, so that really wasn't too much of a big deal to me. Mostly I was still very concentrated on the weather and how rough it was on the drive. I got back on the road. The storm was still in build-up mode at that point. After an agonizing drive, I finally made it home. All the house lights were out, which made me think that my roommate must have been out too. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I checked on the inside of the house, I noticed that, in fact, my roommate had been beaten nearly half to death. I was able to get him to the hospital in time to save his life, but it wasn't really close. He didn't tell others, but he did tell me what happened. He dealt drugs and got into a pretty nasty spat with his supplier, so he got beaten nearly half to death because of it. That is scary enough itself, but also he said it happened about half an hour before I arrived home to find him. If I had never taken that wrong turn that took me 40 minutes out of the way, I would have been at the house in time for the drug deal and may have gotten the same treatment, or who knows, maybe we both would have gotten killed. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.